Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Meghan McPeak, and I am currently in Washington, D.C. with Monumental Sports and Entertainment. And I'm so excited to be joining everyone today for such a fantastic event in partnership with Ryerson, MLSE LaunchPad, and CBC Sports. And to get things started, I would like to welcome in Dr. Rich Norman of Ryerson, along with Savannah Webb, who's a lead coach with MLSE LaunchPad, to kick things off, give a brief explanation as to what you can all expect this afternoon.
Thanks, Megan. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for attending today. I'm really excited for today's panel. It is the first in a series and part of the Sport, Diversity, and Race project that I am heading up with Dr. Sherry Bradish, which is exploring the tensions and challenges of diversity, race, and inclusion in sport and the sport industry. So stay tuned for more details about upcoming panels. This event wouldn't have been possible without the support of the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University in partnership with MLSE Foundation, MLSE LaunchPad, Ryerson's Office of the Vice President of Equity and Community Inclusion, and CBC Sports. I'll pass it over to Savannah Webb to give a land acknowledgement.
Thank you. Ryerson's ongoing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the truth and reconciliation process for Indigenous people in Canada includes a land acknowledgement as a signal of recognition and action to ensure historical inequalities are addressed and rectified. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon territory treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and people, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into the treaty with the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect by the Aboriginal Education Council. And a special thank you to all the panelists for your commitment and ongoing support of this research project. From all of us, we appreciate your work, and your organizations are doing a great job to combat systematic racism and inequality in sport. So back to you, Megan.
Dr. Rich, Savannah, thank you so very much. And to get things started, I'd like to introduce our panels. And my mom taught me manners, so I'm going to do ladies first, of course. First, I'd like to welcome in Marika Warner, Director of Research and Evaluation at MLSE LaunchPad, along with Tanya Phillips, who's the Senior Manager, Strategic Partnerships for Right to Play. And the gentleman this afternoon, Bryant McBride, he's the CEO and co-founder of Burst, along with Marco Di Buono, the Associate VP of Operations at Canadian Tire's Jumpstart. And last but certainly not least, John Wiggins, who's the VP of Organizational Culture Inclusion for the Toronto Raptors. So thank you all for joining me this afternoon. And I'm just going to put it out there. I like to just flow with the conversation. I do have questions prepared, but I might have some follow-ups based on what you all respond to the first ones. And with this conversation, when you think of diversity and inclusion and race and what we've seen over the last 18 months, if not longer, but really and truly what's been at the forefront lately, when you think back, and today is Wednesday, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. So Marika, I'll start with you. When you think of everything we've seen and you reflect back, what does diversity and inclusion and race truly mean to you when you think of what you do with your job and everything we've seen over the last 18 months?
Okay, yeah, good afternoon and thank you. And I am deeply appreciative of the opportunities that this year has opened up for us. It's been incredible. And I want to tell a story right now that for me encapsulates the change that I've experienced professionally, personally over the past year. And I think it's important to note that the story I'm going to tell is about an experience I had with one of my closest colleagues, a white person who I respect immensely and who continues to stand up every day as a very powerful anti-racist ally. But so I was hired at MLSE in 2016. And in my first week, I was riding the elevator with my new colleague, and she had her phone out. She showed me her friend's Instagram page. And it was little staged photos of pieces of fruit with googly eyes glued to them, adorable little fruit characters that were engaging in funny situations. And the account was called Strange Fruit. So naturally, what I wanted to say in that moment was, hey, are you aware that the term strange fruit actually refers to the dead bodies of Black people who were tortured, murdered, and strung up in trees by white supremacists in order to terrorize the Black community? And is also the name of an iconic song that protests the inhumanity of racism. But naturally, what I actually said in that moment was something like, oh, that's cute. So in 2016, it was not safe for me in that moment to give my honest response, to openly acknowledge themes of racism and racist oppression. And in doing that, to point out the white privilege that allowed this person to understand strange fruit as a cute Instagram account and nothing more. So today, it is safe for me to give that response. It's not only safe, it's recognized as a strength, a behavior that actually fosters a positive organizational culture and supports good teamwork. So I've gone from needing to tone my Blackness quotient down to, like somewhere in the 2 to 4 range, and still feel like a total outsider, to regularly get to show up at work at, 7 or 8 and actually receive positive feedback for the benefits that that level of realness actually confers to my work and to my team. I heard a quote the other day that when the winds of change blow, you either build walls or build windmills. So I think we've seen through history and definitely throughout this year that sport builds windmills, not walls. My organization and a lot of others are successfully harnessing that very powerful energy that we are experiencing this year. And I believe that that work will continue. I'm still betting on sport.
Tanya, would you like to follow up with that? And please, gentlemen, feel free to jump in when you feel you have something to say, if you'd like to also touch on the topic.
Likewise, betting on sport, absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan. It was a very triggering time. It's when you remember a year ago this time, and I wasn't expecting what was going to come up and bubble all through the month of June. That ended up happening through the month of June, reaching out to fellow Black and brown people, checking in, are you okay? And everyone's experiencing, buried traumatic experiences that were kind of parked and set aside so that we could survive, because the system isn't really designed for people who look like us. And so it was very emotional, obviously, for everyone, but viscerally emotional, I think, for Black people, because we have been taught to try to blend in and fit in, and we're never going to blend in. But that's what's so great about it, is that we don't want to blend in. We want to create a mosaic. My experience, the triggering one that came up for me was something from, oh my goodness, probably about over 20 years ago. My first day in the sports foray as a full-time employee at a corporate organization. And I had a leader welcome me to the organization and then proceed to tell me, and this person was a white person and was also a female. So female, I was like, okay, cool. There's not a lot of us in sports, right? So we're going to connect eye to eye, because, women in sports, we've got to, there's very few of us, and even fewer Black people in the organization, about 6 or 7, and only 2 or 3 Black women in this corporation. And I was told, welcome to the organization. Now you're going to have to work twice as hard. That was my introduction to the organization. And I didn't quite understand at that time, but boy, did the dot connect a year ago when everything was happening. I have to work twice as hard. I get it. And it's an experience that has happened over and over again, to the point where now, when I get feedback, people say to me, why does Tanya feel like she has to keep proving herself and working so hard? And it's because of that moment and that message over 20 years ago that I was told by someone who I thought was going to be an ally that I have to work twice as hard. We've come a long way. I bet on sport, because that's what we do at Right to Play as well, just like LaunchPad. And thanks to MLSE, who's a huge partner of ours, and also with Marco at Jumpstart, we're all doing the same thing. We're harnessing that power of play to teach kids and youth how to be empowered, to advocate for themselves. And, this was a moment where I actually have to think about, oh my gosh, what we're doing for the kids, we need to do for ourselves as adults right now. This is the moment where we actually have to internally reflect and think about what we're going to do as an organization. And we picked up the harness. I sent a note to the CEO and said, is Right to Play going to be a beacon of hope during this dark time? I'm here to spearhead a DEI committee, and really thrilled to say 1 year later, we have all 22 of our nations have DEI representatives, and we've just hosted our global DEI summit in April. And each of the countries are actively determining what that's going to look like and how we're going to action steps in the right direction. But yeah, it was an incredibly pivotal, emotional time for sure.
I'll jump in. I'm in Lexington, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Spend most of my time, especially in the last year, right here, right, like everybody else in their home. And I think it was the redefinition. It was a year of redefinition of a number of terms. I think the term racism was redefined from the overt act of to sitting on the sidelines doesn't cut it anymore. Ibrahim X. Kendi's mantra of you got to be anti-racist, and I think that adjustment is happening all over the landscape. And this year also really underscored the need for action. It was just I think the combination of the pandemic plus obviously the racial awakening worldwide, it really laid things bare. It redefined the term essential, in terms of who was valued in the workplace. And essential became that person who, is working at the corner store. Essential became that person who's putting food on the table because, it's just a different construct last year for safety reasons, right? I think that was another redefinition, and the definition of hero was upended, right? The people, doctors and nurses and, all of the people who just basically took care of us and helped us be resilient. Teachers, it was incredible. I think it also the year was the beginning of a bulge in the demographic snake, if you will, that really portends the year 2044. The year 2044 is the year that the majority of people in North America are visible minorities. They're 18 right now, right? Where that big bulge is coming from, and they got mad this year. They were out there, and interestingly, in the States at least, the only white group that is in favor of corporations and larger entities using their voices on social justice issues is the 18 to 34 cohort. They're the only ones that index positively. They're coming, and they're coming like a tidal wave. You feel it down here in politics in the US, and you feel it everywhere. And it just so happens, and it's an interesting correlation, at least to me, that the way that athletes use their voices this year, and if you look at the cohort of athletes, it's 18 to pro athletes, especially, it's 18 to 34. So their peers just went, yeah, that's the direction we're heading in.
I'm happy to go next here. Certainly the conversation was cracked wide open, as many of my fellow panelists have alluded to over the past year. And I know there are serious concerns about how much of the statements that were made early on by individuals, by corporations, by public-facing organizations like MLSE, LaunchPad, ourselves, Right to Play, may have been performative. There was a great piece actually Shireen Ahmed published yesterday on this very topic. But what was interesting from my experience is that wide open conversation never died down. The tone only increased throughout the year. And I've got to give thanks to the leadership in our organization for really encouraging that conversation to take shape and form over the past year, and to take concrete actions that we're still working towards on a daily basis. And to the notion of power of sport, we took a very, very aggressive approach when we invested in community sport relief back in the fall of 2020. Knowing that the sports sector was hurting, we nonetheless did not use it as an excuse to say, look, we can't push the notion of inclusion in sport at the grassroots level any further. We took a firm stand and said, we're going to fund organizations that are going to make a firm commitment to increasing their efforts towards inclusion in sport. And we were a little bit concerned, to be honest, what the response was going to be from grassroots organizations across the country. But to our surprise, pleasantly, the overwhelming majority of organizations across the country embraced it. They came back, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. They either had efforts in place that they wanted to pursue with support, or they wanted help in starting the journey towards inclusion at the grassroots level. And so that only fueled our fire even further, working with new organizations that we hadn't formulated partnerships with in the past to really start aggressively working towards building the capacity at the grassroots level of sport for true inclusion. We're not going to rest on our laurels by any stretch. And again, grateful for the leadership that we have in our organization, but also on a personal note, I have an 18-year-old daughter who holds me to account every day. To your point, Brian, about that cohort of the younger generation holding us to account. That's happening in my household too, and I'm grateful for that.
John, before you say anything, I want to ask a specific question because of the nature with which, in a trying time, your organization made a very bold decision to drive in one of the more delicate states in the US, if you will, when it comes to race, with 2 buses with the words Black Lives Matter on it in the heat of the racial unjust. So reflecting back, the same question for you, but I wanted to make sure people who were joining us knew that you were part of that decision. What has this past year been like? Because you're engulfed in sports, you're engulfed in these athletes, as Brian and Marco both just said, utilizing their voices and their platforms to try and make a change. So how have you reflected back on this past year that's been so uncommon and unprecedented?
Yeah, and again, thank you for the question, and thanks for having me on the panel today. I think I'm still kind of reflecting back. It's been a fast, crazy, furious year. But yeah, yesterday allowed for an inflection point of saying, geez, look where we've come and what's happened in a year. What I get from it is that life was normalized before. Rodney King, we grew up with that, and that was normal. That's the way life happened. That's the way cases were resolved. And so over time, seeing the incidents that have been happening in the community, especially to Black people, it was normalized. Whatever happened on the death and murder of George Floyd, it woke up some emotion that said, this isn't normal. And it's not supposed to be normal. And I'm not saying like we truly felt it. I know it's not normal, but I liken it to, we've been scarred for a very, very long time. And the wounds beneath those scars are not healed. And that ripped the scar off. It ripped the scab off. And now we continue to feel the pain. And we kind of said, you know what? We don't want to continue to move this way, right? That's what this new EDI space means for me. Social justice has awoken for me. And to the earlier point of action, we got to do more about it. And whether we're that 18 to 34 cohort, or I'm a little bit above that bracket myself, but I have a platform to do something about it. And I think that was the shift for me, right? I've been focused on basketball operations and team and winning, but this platform and winning took a new definition on how we're going to win in the community and how we're going to win in society, on how our team can do that. So maybe when you mentioned the buses, that was us saying, and a lot of people may not know, we didn't just drive into Disney with the buses. We drove 2 hours across the state of Florida, right up I-4, for everyone to see how powerful we were about to take action and say that Black Lives Matter. We wanted the state of Florida, and I lived there for 7.5 years. I understand what happens in Florida in terms of racism and intolerance and oppression. We wanted the whole Florida state to know that before we were coming, that things were about to change. And I think that's really what has come out of this. Things need to change. Sport is that platform. We've got a campaign here at MLSE called Change the Game. And I'm going to come forward and saying we took a part out of it, but I think it's an important part. The game is fixed. It's been fixed. The barriers, the restrictions, the oppression, the systemic racism that takes place, the game, I'm not talking about basketball or hockey, the game of life is fixed. And we're going to change that. That's what the Change the Game campaign means for us. And so with every action, with every intention, with every player, with every platform, with every kneeling, every protest, we're going to take action to make sure we can do something about it, because sport can change it. Sport is the great unifier. We go all the way back to like the gladiator days, right? It brings everyone together in an arena, in a coliseum, and it brings the community together. And I think that's the power that we have in all of our verticals, in all of our areas, for us to bring the community together to fight this, to make the world a better place.
I think that's fantastic what you said, John, especially, you know, your first point with Rodney King. After the trial began for Derek Chauvin, and then once the verdict came down and it was a clean sweep across the board, someone made the point, and I wish I could remember who it was, but they said the only difference between Rodney King and George Floyd is the camera quality. Absolutely. That's it. But we got two different results. So it's so interesting. And to those that are joining us, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please, I'll be monitoring the chat as best as I can. Please put them into the chat if you've got any questions. If the conversation sparks something, please don't wait until the end to ask your questions. We want to try and get those to everyone as quickly as possible. But now that we've reflected back in the present moment, and Marco, we'll start with you. When you look at diversity, inclusion, education, you mentioned your daughter holds you to a higher standard and holds your feet to the fire. So knowing that, what are things that you are working on in this space, and how have things shifted or changed for yourself and your company to meet this new social reality, if you will?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's forced us really to stop, think, and really reflect on the actions we're about to take or want to take, and make sure that we're having open and transparent conversations about whether or not we are perpetuating the discrimination that John touched on in the work that we do. And I have to tell you, it's really become apparent to us that the systems within which we work in philanthropy are riddled with discriminatory practices that go back decades, and not, since the dawn of philanthropy in this country. We're grateful that Senator Omidvar is trying to change the game, and not to get into the details behind the scenes of how this all works, but there are limitations to the types of organizations we can fund. And if we're truly going to make a difference in this space, we need to start getting to Black-led, Indigenous-led organizations who are doing the work at the grassroots to engage with children and youth and change the game. We can't do that under the current constructs of philanthropy in this country. We can barely do it under the constructs of sport philanthropy in this country. And on the same token, we need to stop just funding organizations and holding them to these ridiculous expectations around reporting and constraints about what they can and can't do with the dollars. As I mentioned earlier, the overwhelming majority of organizations want to embrace inclusion. They don't know how. They lack the capability. They lack the capacity. That requires a whole level of trust from funders to be able to say, we're going to help you build that in partnership with the organizations in the space that know what they're doing, so that you can build relationships with existing participants and prospective participants from racialized communities in your area that want to be part of your organization. Those constructs don't exist in modern philanthropy. There have been great reports written about this, but those reports are, unless we action against them, we're not going to go anywhere. So to your point, what are we doing to address that? If one door closes, we find our way. If we have to body check our way through another door, we will. We will find a way to get supports where they need to be, no matter how convoluted we have to make it right now, until the constructs are changed and they're no longer discriminatory.
The question is also for the rest of the panel, if any of you would like to join in. And Heather, you were asking about the quote that I saw. I can't remember who it was, but I definitely saw it on Twitter. So I apologize that I can't give you the exact reference if you'd like to use it. But again, to the panel, if any of you would like to speak on this topic as well too, on how your organization or yourself are shifting, or how things have shifted or changed to meet this new social reality. Excuse me. I think you're on mute, Tanya.
I was on mute. Oh my gosh, I did the you're on mute
technology
thing. Oh no. I'd love to lift off what you're saying, because as Right to Play is also a charity, it is quite the challenge to be able to be in this space. But what Right to Play has done so well is that reflect that you're talking about. We actually utilize, that's part of our methodology in Right to Play, is through the play, we reflect, we connect, and we apply. So the RCA model. And we just literally need to do this in real life. Reflect, connect, and apply. And I would also say that what Right to Play is honed in on specifically in our Canadian office, and I'm so grateful to this, is we have partners, Indigenous partners in Indigenous communities, exactly what you're talking about. And it's through our Indigenous partners that Right to Play is being able to help in this space of inclusivity, and also being able to provide resources back, because we don't know what we don't know. And we're not one of those organizations that's going to fly in and provide the, what support we think. It's more about learning from communities what is needed, where the gaps are, and how we can help. And that's kind of the shift in the mindset in our sector of philanthropy. On the personal space, I would have to say I did a bit of Amanda Gormaning. Like, that's why I'm wearing this headband now, because I was so impressed with her when she spoke. And so my mantra this year is step into my crown, because I've been whilst I'm an outspoken person, I've been very reserved on speaking out in this space, because we were taught to fit in. And so stepping into my crown, I'm going to own my queenness and actually speak on it, and actually do things, take the actions, exactly, John, what you're saying about changing the game. So really proud to say that with the help and partnership of some amazing Black women across Canada, 13 of them, we co-founded the Canadian Black Standard, which is an advocacy group for Black women across Canada in the marketing sector specifically. So this is side of our desk stuff. We already have over 5,000 followers on social. We already have 500 members. There was a gap, because in marketing, it's about storytelling. And Black women we are for sure, and it's been proven, the bottom of the pay scale, if you were to look at the parity. And in fact, in corporate Canada, which is what we're talking about, corporate Canada trying to move and change the game, we call ourselves the standard, because we're going to set it, we're going to raise it, and we're going to be it. And we're going to invite companies to come in and join us on this journey. So be about it. So that's one. And then in another area, WISE, which is Women in Sports and Events, carved a new space in terms of its board. So inclusion has to start definitely at the top, as it always happens at the bottom, but we got to have some inclusion leaders. And so for WISE to make space to have a diversity and inclusion chair, newly as of this year, is great, because we're now starting to frame what that's going to look like. So creating space for DEI to be looked at in an integrated way, I think, is really, really critical.
I would add that, as well as that space, and I 100% agree with that, with what Tanya is saying, there is space now to express and to emote and just be who you are. As well as that, I think, and currently this year, what is playing out is that tools are emerging. And when I see that, the tools of, I think that George Floyd was so powerful, and it was so visceral, right? In that it was irrefutable. You saw it, right? Everyone saw it. It couldn't be ignored. It couldn't be doubted. It was completely and utterly irrefutable. Marco knows me well. I've done a bunch of these, and I talk about 5 books: The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. A lot of white friends said, "What do we do?" Right? Like, how do we help? I said, read those books. That's how you can understand a 360 perspective of the 400 years, what has happened, irrefutable. They are factual. There's no opinion, right? This is what happened. There was a, to the earlier points, there was a lynching every 3 days in the United States for the first 4 decades of the 20th century. That is just a fact, right? So that irrefutability of knowing all of those facts, and frankly, the thread that runs through all of it is the insidious intent, right? People just got smarter about oppression and subjecting people of color, and that has to be known. So the irrefutability of that video just stamped it, right? So the tool that has emerged, I firmly believe, is to use irrefutability. This is a fact, especially in an age of disinformation. It's in misinformation. That clouds and muddies so much. If you just speak facts plainly, simply, unemotionally, this is what happened. This is what is happening now, and it's still going on. We made the film Willie, and we really wanted to showcase what has happened and what is still happening in a way that people could not refute it, and tell a story that was powerful. The other tool, to Tanya's point, is storytelling, right? We are really focused on storytelling. We told that story and it resonated. It hit home. So he wasn't seen, Willie O'Ree wasn't seen just as a wonderful black man. He's seen as a wonderful man, right? It humanized him. So that drumbeat, that cadence, that rhythm of storytelling across all screens is a powerful tool that we're looking forward to expanding on.
Okay, I have to jump in there. So, there's the irrefutable facts of history, and then there's also the irrefutable reality of today, right? So, and I'm in the research business. So I'll quote Jay-Z quickly here: men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. And on the research side, my team has just finished analyzing a large data set that we collected from over 7,000 youth, diverse youth and parents across Ontario, to assess youth sport access and engagement in the wake of the pandemic through a sharply focused equity lens. And we're generating learnings and insights through that data that will inform an anti-racist future in youth sport as we build back better after the pandemic. We've always collected race-based data with our MLSE LaunchPad program participants, because there are important disparities between different racial groups in sport that we need to learn about. We've always applied race-based analyses in our research and evaluation work at MLSE LaunchPad and in MLSE Foundation programming. But the opportunity to do that at a sectoral level really offers enormous potential. So we're talking to organizations like ParticipAction about adding a racial lens to their very influential annual report on youth physical activity. Because of a research partnership with Dr. Janelle Joseph at U of T's Ideas Lab, OUA, Ontario University Athletics, is collecting race-based data for the first time this year. We're asking the questions, we're getting the answers that were previously seen as either too political, too damning, or maybe just not that important. And I just want to follow up as well on some comments around funding for youth sport. So, MLSE Foundation has really recognize those deep roots of racism in the charitable space. And we're addressing it both through providing some thought leadership in that space, as well as through changing the ways that we do things. So we've researched, created, and implemented a new granting strategy that builds sustainable capacity with Black and Indigenous-led organizations. And then on the more outward-facing side of the coin, our organization is working now to create an advocacy strategy for dismantling anti-Black racism. So at our board meeting tomorrow, I will be presenting a process that we will be using to gather input from a range of stakeholders in our community to select an issue or issues to move forward with as our advocacy focus in terms of anti-Black racism. So we have a pretty high octane team of board members and staff members in place to support that work. And the energy and the momentum are quite high to carry forward with some really strategic, really impactful advocacy around anti-Black racism and how it affects the youth that we serve. I can keep talking.
No, I mean, that was fantastic. And it actually, it might tie into, we've got a couple questions that came in the chat. So your topic might actually tie into a couple of these. So Akash, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Akash is wondering, what will it take to persuade public funders such as Heritage Canada to put their money where their mouth are? if the past year of massive public debate on systemic racism, like what will it take for these types of funding partnerships and companies to actually stop talking the talk and walk the walk?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that's long overdue. And there's a little bit of reason to be hopefully optimistic. If you read the last budget announcement from the federal government, there was a commitment to $80 million towards grassroots community sport participation to really get the sector back up and operational again in the wake of the devastating impact COVID has had on a lot of those community organizations. And the Parliamentary Secretary for Sport, Adam Van Koeverden, has made it unequivocally clear that this is going to be invested through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, how that happens is yet to be determined. We haven't seen any of the details, but that statement has been made repeatedly that this is going to get into the hands of grassroots organizations with a strong emphasis on inclusion. So again, proof will be in the pudding when it actually happens, but there's reason to at least be optimistic about what that $80 million might be able to do at that grassroots level.
I would say, sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's going to take a lot of us knocking on some doors and picking up some phone calls and calling some people. We're trying to start an initiative right now to install some land acknowledgement plaques on all of our buildings. For those who know, Scotiabank Arena used to be, the Canadian Post Office. So as such, it's a Heritage Canada site. And for some reason, this makes it more complicated to acknowledge that it's on land that is not ours. That's just stupid to me. And when I got wind of that, now it's our turn to step in. We've got influence. We've got power. A couple of years ago, we threw a party at City Hall. You guys saw what that looked like. We know that our organization has power and influence. So to Akasha's question, we need to step up. And then we've got to hold accountable all of our partners, like the City of Toronto, like Heritage Canada, like the Government of Canada, because we've got relationships with them. Everyone heard Masai say we need to call out our white leaders who are our partners and have them start stepping up and paying attention. This world moves off of influence. We all understand that. And so if there's things that need to be done, and again, we spoke about it earlier when it's why is it so hard for us to give money to programs? Why is it so hard for us to grant? Why do we have so many restrictions? This work isn't difficult. It's made difficult because of the barriers that are in front of us. But truthfully, if we just all start doing the right thing, that's how we'll get there, Akasha, to answer your question. But I think we recognize and we realize that in any position of influence and power, we've got to step up, and that's what we want to do. And we want to bring other people with us, other organizations, other programs, other municipalities, governments. We got to bring them with us to make these changes.
I would answer that through the lens of being in the States, okay? And it's a different calculus down here, right? At the political level, it's just, put your helmet on, chin strap buckled up, it's wild. But at the corporate level, there have been, and conservatively, and our team has looked really hard at this. This is a wild number. There's been $35 billion pledged by corporations in the United States since George Floyd's death to do the work, right? And that's just a staggering number. Now, when right after George Floyd, the duality, the dual racial anxiety, if you will, going on down here really emerged. It's the racial anxiety that I feel when my kids drive out of the driveway in my car. That's real, right? For every person of color down here. And it's frankly the anxiety that, I'm being a little facetious, but not by much. I got 25 phone calls from white CEOs, CMO friends, allies forever, like people that I trust have gone, I've been into battle with, and I trust them. And they basically said to me, hey, we sent out our We Love Black People Instagram. What do we do now? They were freaked out, right? And they aren't freaked out. And their anxiety is they want to help and they don't know how. And they definitely don't want to touch that third rail of doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing. So there's anxiety that's grinding here. So the accountability of what are those companies really going to do? But they're also facing different pressure points now. the pressure points of, you know, the precedent that Colin Kaepernick and Nike set and others set, that, okay, you got to be, you can't be a bland, faceless corporation. You got to stand for something. That pressure from external consumers, and the internal pressure of, you know, the people on the screen and the people that work for them, people of color who are saying, you know, what the hell? What are we going to do? Where do we work? What do we stand for? So it is a time of reckoning, and it is a time of accountability as to who's really going to do the work, and monitoring that and ensuring that that happens is part of the challenge now.
Another question that came in is from Rob, and he has an interesting one specifically about the IOC's Rule 50, which, for those that may be unaware, it basically, the short version, it restricts athletes at the Olympics from freedom of expression, and they're implementing a safe time, if you will, when athletes can actually utilize their protest rights during the Olympic Games, and only do it at certain times, which, in my opinion, completely takes away from the spontaneity and the purpose of an actual protest when it comes to that. So Rob would like to know from the panelists, he's interested in your opinion with the IOC and the IPC rule to essentially silence athletes.
Good luck. Did they not pay attention to what happened in the world? And what has happened with many years of Olympic competitions. I mean, we all talk about sport being the great unifier, and if IOC could just flip their mind into seeing that this is not a protest but a unifying way to change the world, IOC could be the leader in this by celebrating how the world came together a year ago, how the world, all these different countries came together. That's what I grew up thinking the Olympics was all about. And, that's why a lot of people play sports, and the other side of sports, and the camaraderie and the sportsmanship and all that sort of stuff. You take that away, you take away the humanizing point, to your point, of what we're all here for. Like, we're humans first, and things that are globally not okay are globally not okay. And let's figure out a way to do it together, unified, better. We know better now. Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. So we know better, and we want to do better. And it looks like the world wants to do better. So IOC, jump on that and own it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just jump on that to say, this world would actually be a different place. And a lot of us would probably be different people if John Carlos and Tommy Smith hadn't done what they did, and if we hadn't all got to see that. And this is just, to me, it's just another example of the deep roots of racism and oppression in sport. So, we're pulling up a tree that's been growing for centuries, and in some ways is healthier than ever, and is actually living its best life. And that's not easy to pull up that kind of tree. We're seeing a lot of examples like this, the IOC situation, the NFL brain injury settlement process that's underway that requires Black athletes to demonstrate lower cognitive functioning than their white peers in order to receive a payout, because their baseline cognition is assumed to be warped. So, it's going to take a huge amount of persistence, strength, and tools to pull out roots that are that deep and that strong. And this, to me, is just another example.
Maybe the IOC didn't get the message, but we're not going to shut up and dribble. We're not going to shut up and not throw our javelin. We're not going to shut up and just run. So I hope every athlete takes it and says, oh, you're going to give us this time. You're going to put us in our place and tell us when we can protest. I hope we do the exact opposite when we get down there. I truly do, because the conversation needs to continue. And what's happening in the world cannot just fade away while the Olympics happen. And on the largest global sports platform that we have in this world, why wouldn't we continue the conversation and share those messages? So to the IOC, you guys clearly don't get it, but you will.
I would agree with that. I don't know where they're getting their cues from. I think every one of the panelists here in different ways. I certainly know, Marika and Tanya, your organizations like ours has athlete ambassadors who are part of the COC and IOC, and we intentionally bring them on board to help, raise awareness about these issues with the kids that we support in communities across the country. I know Bryant does the same, and clearly John uses the platform at his disposal to do this. So I'm not sure where they're getting their cues, because most organizations like ours are embracing the opportunity to have that open dialogue with representatives from the sport community, from diverse communities in meaningful ways. So good luck is a good way to put it.
We have another question. This one is from Ayana. And Marika, I think this would actually tie into your research background, because they're asking, how can the academic and or research community contribute to the EDI field and at the same time help individuals and organizations to create policies aiming at inclusivity, awareness, and equality, excuse me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, we're seeing more academics partnering with community-based organizations, and I think that's key. We can't have practitioners sort of off acting in our own space, not integrating the evidence that's going to help us do what we do on the ground better. At the same time, we can't have researchers just off sort of theorizing and coming up with ideas that are not grounded in reality. So I really hope to see more partnerships involving academic and community sport or professional sport for better outcomes. And those partnerships, it can be a scary chasm to bridge, but it's not a hard chasm to bridge. It's honestly not. Reach out to an academic, ask them if they'd like to partner with you on research. Academic, reach out to a community sport organization, ask them if they'd like to partner with you on a research project. It's as easy as sending an email.
Yeah, to build on that, we've been working with Marika and her team to understand how we can build capacity for grassroots organizations to actually evaluate their programs so that they can start collecting some of this data. But importantly, the flip side of doing the research is also the knowledge transfer and exchange piece. And so, we've been exploring with all kinds of ways to create communities of practice, sharing of information, so that we're connecting organizations that are doing a really good job in this space with the scientists, the researchers who are exploring this issue in a more coordinated and methodological way, with the organizations that have an interest in really advancing EDI within their organizations, right? So there's two sides to this. It can't just be the research piece. We can't just generate the knowledge. We need to get it out into the hands of the people who can make a difference with it.
One other thing I would add in terms of the framing of this window, right, and using academics and other tools. We're proponents of big I inclusion, but I'll use the Black experience because it's my lived experience. In the historical context of, this is the fourth Black Renaissance. After the Civil War down here in the States, 25, 35 Black elected officials. The 1920s, Langston Hughes, Harlem, the surge in the performative arts and Black people being accepted for creating exceptional work. 1960s, obviously, with MLK and Malcolm X and, the civil rights explosion. Here we are. Are we going to bring to bear everything we have? Big canvas, lots of paint. How are we going to be remembered? What are we going to do? How are we going to really affect change that sustains and sticks, right? So rigorous quantitative and qualitative research against these issues and problems is a must. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So I think the combining of forces, the utilization of all power that's out there to really shine a spotlight on the issues that we're facing collectively is imperative.
So this next question is from Faisela. Or Faisla. So again, apologize if I mispronounced that. And I feel very comfortable assuming the answer from all of you, but I'm still going to ask it. Can EDI work without addressing systemic racism in your organizations? My assumption is no from everyone.
We all got to get uncomfortable. We all got to get in it. We've had the white elephant conversation. That's the three other renaissances you're talking about there, right? Like, what's going to be different about now is that we all there's a colleague of mine at Right to Play. She is phenomenal. And she brought up this phrase, we all got to sit in the mud. We all got to get dirty. Like, we have to take off take off the layers and be fully transparent and own and be responsible for everything. Because until that happens, we can't reset. We can't change the game. We can't establish a new standard to change the behavior. You know, there's a sequence of things that happens naturally. And if we don't deal with it from the beginning, then we get what we've had before, where we're buried in our trauma until the next renaissance comes along, and we're no further ahead. So how can we make this time different is actually doing the dirty work.
Yeah, I agree with you. Not fun. I agree, Tanya. And I think, you know, it's at the macro level, some of the tactics we've been talking about, looking at who's on our boards, how we give out dollars, how we program for youth, how we invest, etc. But it's also at the micro level. It's having those messy, dirty conversations. You know, I spoke at length with 3 of my team members last week about Israeli apartheid and our role in the Palestinian struggle. Messy conversation. You know, our organization looked at Orange Shirt Day for the first time this past year. Black staff are making time to come together within work hours to have conversations, to connect, to strategize, to build inclusion by holding that exclusive space. And I think, yeah, all of that talking is absolutely vital to that systemic change.
So we've only got, sorry, Marco, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, you know, Tanya mentioned earlier, she had to work twice as hard to be recognized, you know, as a Black woman in the work that she was doing. It's my turn to work twice as hard, not harder, to really make sure that I'm holding myself accountable, quite frankly, to really get uncomfortable and start addressing some of these issues, which quite honestly, I have decades of preconceived notions about. So I have to dismantle all of that, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. You know, so truthfully, I owe it to you, Tanya, to inspire that. I need to work twice as hard now, as does my organization, to really make sure we're dealing with this issue properly.
That's fantastic insight and self-awareness that, if I'm being completely frank and honest, I don't think a lot of our white counterparts would be willing to have and be honest about that. So I truly appreciate your candor and your honesty with that comment, Marco. But we've got a few minutes left, so I have one final question that I'd like to close out this conversation with, and it's to everyone on the panel. And to make it easy, we'll start with ladies first. So Tanya, I'll start with you, and this again is for everyone. But looking ahead and looking forward, what do you all see as challenges to make change in this space? What would you like to see? And what is missing from the conversation or actions for us to get there?
I think, I mean, we've said it a bit before, is moving from the performative to actual actions, including in organizations, DEI KPIs at every level of company, because there is something everyone can do from the micro to the macro. Everybody can be more of an inclusive human. Myself included, ourselves included. We can all do something to make the world a better and more inclusive space. So applying that to creating new standards within organizations for performance is not just bottom line dollars, but how are we doing that through a DEI lens, I think is important. I think boards is a very big one, because boards have been around for a long time, and it was actually the Ryerson Institute on Diversity and Equity that did this study, that there are 1,600 board positions in Canada. 1,600 corporately, not charity boards, but corporate board positions, and 4 of them are held by Black women. You have got to be kidding me. Like, it's 2021, right? And so how is that going to change? Because if we continue to have more of the same, more status quo, we're going to get the same results. Definition of insanity, right? So we've got to start to do things differently if we want to have different results. Yeah, and I think changing the power of influence. So putting people in positions of power of influence that are, you know, diverse, representation matters, but also giving them the power of influence. So it's not just a token person in a C-suite role, but they actually get a power of influence, and where diversity of thought is embraced versus status quo, and coloring outside the lines and doing things differently. That's celebrated versus seen as like an uncomfortable challenge to address. I think allowing for that difference in thought. I mean, we're the most multicultural country in the world. That's our biggest asset, but we're not even scratching the surface as a nation. So I think, you know, if we were to own it and harness that, I think we could be in a much better place a year from now.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I think it will be challenging for our organizations to really persist, to stay on the continue to give it our energy, which is a finite resource, in the face of the other demands, other societal pressures that come up, priorities that come up. It'll be challenging to give this fight all of our strength as well, to divert some of our personal and organizational resources towards doing this work, and to find the right tools, get our hands on the right tools that we need to do this work. So to reframe the conversations we're having with our funders, with our corporate partners, to sustainably fund our work on these issues. To open up channels for sharing that vital race-based data, to collaborate with our professional teams, with our leagues, our politicians, and other partners that can help us amplify this work. In terms of what I'd like to see more investment in youth community sport and recognition that because of the positive outcomes of community sport, access to community sport for youth is actually one way to build a more just and equitable society. And in 2021, 2020, we've seen further polarization of haves and have-nots, and that's a racial issue, and sport has everything to do with it. So yeah, I'll close by saying I think we work in sport. What all of us really want at the end of the day is to win. So I want to see LaunchPad and MLSE Foundation, other sport organizations who are stepping into this space, get some tangible win in the advocacy space, some measurable win. And there are some great cases playing out right now that we'll see if we get the win.
And that's the point there. We're gonna have to redefine how we look at winning a little bit, right? I'm tired of hearing, well, this is the way we've always done it. I'm tired of hearing, well, this is how we've been successful, because we've been winning for a very long time, but that all is now being seen through a different lens. We've won championships, but did we win it in a sense of equity, diversity, and inclusion? Or we might have to look at things a little differently now, right? Let's just take, for instance, like broadcast. We all know broadcast is changing. It's going from linear to digital, but we can do things differently. And I'm sure broadcast has been winning, and they've been very successful. And I'm speaking in generally as an industry. They've been successful with the way they've been doing things, but it's time to change that up. It's time to look at things differently, right? It's time to have better representation in front of that camera. It's better to have better representation behind the camera in terms of producers and executive producers. We just got to redefine winning, and that requires a mentality change. That to me is the barrier that we're facing right now. That's the challenge. That's what's going to make it difficult. Is to not only say, well, we're going to take everything we know in terms of success and change it around, but that's a reprogramming of people's brains, and that's going to be difficult. But it is going to take some open-mindedness. It's going to take resources that need to be invested, and it's just going to take some courage with respects to changing things up and doing things differently for an even bigger win.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's going to take a lot more creativity to John's point. We've got to stop making excuses that things are hard, so we can't do them, or that's the way it's always been done, so it can't be done. I'd like to think that we kind of defied that logic over the past year, and we're going to continue to do it. And the thing too, redefining winning, we're doing this together. This isn't a competition between Right to Play, Jumpstart, or MLSE. This is more like a relay. We're in this together, and it's not going to be a marketable point of differentiation. We're going to do this together because the gains to be had in partnership are so much stronger than the gains that we can make independently, because these issues are long ingrained in the work that we do, and we're going to be more successful tackling them together.
I would I 100% agree on that. There's no exclusivity in making the world better, right? So absolutely, everyone pulling on the oar in the same direction. And I would add to John's point about courage. Every leader, every CEO in the sports sector and beyond has to be a CDO, has to be the Chief Diversity Officer. That's the call to action, and that's the leadership that's needed right now. If it falls down at the leadership level, people aren't held accountable for hiring. People aren't held accountable for policies that have been implemented. Right? Consistency. I tell my kids, it's the person that is the most consistent wins. Right? That shows up and does the work. CEOs have to be CDOs. That's the courage that's needed, so that when combined with and I'll put it together, irrefutable consistency. being disciplined, being really, really disciplined. You look at January 6th, the one story that has not been told down here, at least, and about the insurrection was, you noticed, all of the black protesters, there were none. That was by design. That discipline carried the day, or we may be in the middle of a civil war right now down here, right? That wasn't by accident. That was a lot of young people. My 17-year-old daughter getting texts on her phone for a month before, we are not going to Washington. That's real, right? So that discipline, that consistency, that's what's going to carry the day.
Thank you all for your honesty, your candor, your insight, your life experiences in this conversation. Once again, Marika Warner, Tanya Phillips, Bryant McBride, Marco Buono, and John Wiggins. And I would like to welcome back Dr. Rich Norman as well as Savannah Webb to close things out and say some thank yous.
I guess I can go. Wow. Thank you all so much for being part of this. What a conversation. Completely beyond my expectations. I think it has given us a lot to think about, and really happy to have you all share your experiences and your perspectives and have that filter out into a wider audience. And hopefully that will give some other people some courage to help make this change happen. And Savannah?
Yeah, just to echo what he said, thank you for sharing all your thoughts. It was amazing to hear all you speak, and definitely want to implement some of those things into LaunchPad and the stuff that we do with the youth that we work with. Thank
you, everybody, once again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and most importantly, stay safe.